Hey, thanks for checking this out. We've got quite a bit to cover here today, so I'll get right to it. Photo pricing is a bit of a mystery to a lot of photographers, and I'm sure it holds a lot of people back. Many are worried they might overcharge and miss the sale, or even worse, undercharge and leave money on the table. I'm sure you can all relate to that, as there's few things worse than quoting a price in any business and hearing those terrible words, "Wow, that's cheap." I've actually got an example of this that I'll share with you shortly. It will probably break your heart, mainly because it was so avoidable, but I'm getting ahead of myself. If you're not totally confident with how to price your work, you're in luck, because today I'm going to give you a crash course in stock photography pricing, and I'll even show you a couple of ways you can take the stress right out of it for once and for all. First up though, a few fundamentals. Professional photographers don't sell their images, they license them. When you license an image, you're granting your customer the permission to use that image in return for a license fee. The actual permissions granted can vary considerably, but the key point is you never sell the actual image itself as a commodity, instead you rent out the use of it. There are various pricing models, but the one we use and recommend is rights managed. As the name implies, it's a system that lets you manage the rights to use your images. It acknowledges that the images are your property and you have the right to control where and how they are used, and to be adequately compensated each time they are used. Since a good image might be used many times in its lifetime, it follows that by protecting your rights you should be paid a suitable license fee each and every time. As the image owner, this kind of control over your work is fundamental, and it's something you should definitely hang on to. A lot of photographers will try and tell you that rights managed pricing is based on the value of the image to the client, or how much you think the client can afford, but that's totally back to front. Rights managed pricing is simply based on the impact of the given sale on the future earnings potential of that image. It all comes back to the value of a photo. Every photo has an intrinsic value based on various factors such as the uniqueness of the content or subject matter, the unique style of the photographer, and of course the quality of execution. And in a lot of ways it's really just simple supply and demand. A great photo will always be less common and in more demand than a poor shot of the same subject, so it will always be worth more. A rare subject is always going to be harder to capture than one everyone shoots, so that has a higher value as well. There's also commercial factors involved, and a shot that was carefully planned and captured to perfectly match the client's specific needs is always worth more than a random snapshot. Finally, freshness and publishing history will also impact on the image's value. To put it simply, the more exposure an image gets, the less appeal it might hold for other clients in the future. So the key concepts here are: every image has a starting value equivalent to its likely lifetime earnings potential. And every time an image is published, it surrenders a portion of that earnings potential until it reaches a point where the value is all but gone. So in rights managed licensing, what happens is really a two-step calculation. First of all, we're giving the image a value based on its potential earnings or its residual value. Then we put a price on the impact the usage in question will have on the residual value. So as an example, if a publisher wants an image for a 1/8 reproduction in a short print run textbook, that's really going to have minimal impact on future sales. So most photographers would consider this one of the cheapest uses, and the prices in this market are about the lowest you'll see. And that one would probably come in at minimum rate for most photographers, around about $100, $120. However, if a different client wanted to use the same image for an extensive, high-profile international multimedia campaign, it would be a very different story. The image would get enormous exposure and it would have a real impact on future sales, so that needs to be reflected in the license fee. Depending on the length of the campaign, it could be that the image wouldn't have any value to speak of once they're done, so the license fee should really be very close to the image's total residual value. This client is basically wanting to use up the image, so they need to compensate you for that use, and it should correlate to what you would have expected to earn from other sales if they hadn't used the image. As you can probably imagine, it's not an exact science by any means, but there's a lot more to it than just charging what you think the buyer can afford. In fact, if you stick with me a bit longer, I'll show you a simple way to consistently come up with current market pricing, but first a quick word about the other licensing options. Royalty free comes in many guises, but basically it's a system based on the size of the image supplied. There's no limit on the way the image is used, the length of time the image is used for, or how many times the image might be used. It requires the photographer to give up all future control of the image and any rights to any kind of payment for those future uses. So in our early examples, a textbook publisher might buy a low-res version of the image for $5, while the high-profile advertiser might have to spend a little bit more for a larger file. But essentially both are getting the same image, super cheap, and the photographer gets peanuts. Microstock is even more troubling, with buyers often paying a flat subscription rate that allows them to download multiple images over time. and they usually end up paying even less per image. The same lack of control applies, so once an image is licensed by either method, it can be used by the customer for any purpose at all, forever. Another disturbing trend seems to be that the lower the prices, the more the stock library wants to charge in commission. So in some of these libraries, the photographers are expected to be grateful to see even 20% of the sales. It's important to understand that this business model bears no resemblance to the traditional stock agency system, where your stock library was a partner, a mentor, and even a friend. Mainstream Stock is a high volume, small margin business that makes the photo distributor a fortune, but to be blunt, it screws over the photographers who make it all possible. This isn't likely to change either. These mainstream libraries are publicly listed companies, so they are legally obligated to their shareholders to maximise their profits. And in that equation, the photographer's commission is just another cost that needs to be kept to an absolute bare minimum. So if you're ever tempted to go that route, don't ever kid yourself that these multinational photo superstores have your best interests at heart. It's not all bad news though. There are other independent libraries that have different philosophy and different priorities, and even if you decide that Global Eye is not the right one for you, I do applaud you for taking the time to research these other options. You should also be aware that not all buyers are equal either. They're certainly not the bargain hunting penny pinchers that the mainstream stock libraries would have you believe. In fact, if you seek out high quality buyers and show them the perfect image, the minute they start looking, many will just grab it at pretty much any price and move on. Price and licensing terms are quite secondary to the value you offer when you give a buyer exactly what they want as soon as they need it. We've got a simple system for getting this done, but this video is getting a bit long, so that will have to wait for another day. For now, I do want to make it totally clear, rights managed licensing compensates the photographers for the use of their images, while royalty-free and microstock are just a mass distribution business that happens to involve photography. I'll get off my soapbox there and get back to it. The impact of usage on residual value. Here's a couple of specific examples that might help put it in perspective. Quite often a client will ask for first-time rights to use an image, though usually it will be for a specific region. First, North American rights, for example. What they're saying is simple. They don't want any of their intended audience to have ever seen the image before. So obviously, royalty-free and microstock is out. So they come to your library and find one of your images that's perfect. The only problem is it's already been used, so you miss out on what could have been a quite lucrative sale. The thing here is, it doesn't matter if the previous use was as a thumbnail in a textbook that you sold for $50 or a double-page spread in Time magazine that you got $2,000 for. The image is still going to be considered used and unsuitable for this kind of high-end use. So while it might be tempting sometimes to discount the low-end sales as insignificant, that one small sale could disqualify your image from a much larger sale somewhere down the track. So as a business person, you must make sure that you're compensated for every use every time. So a good starting point is to decide on your own personal minimum rate, the lowest price at which you'll license an image, and stick to it, no matter how insignificant the usage might seem. You have to value your work and your time and your skills if you expect your clients to. Exclusive rights is another similar situation. I've seen plenty of instances where an image has been previously used but the buyer still wanted exclusive use to it, providing the photographer could guarantee them exclusive use of the image for a set period into the future. Again, these exclusive rights sales can be relatively common and do pay very well. The key is your ability to guarantee the client exclusive use of the image. If your image has ever been distributed through a royalty-free library or a microstock, you can't offer that assurance. Once an image has been downloaded from those sites, the buyer has it forever, and you simply cannot know if and when they might publish it again. And if you struggle with the idea of charging different prices for different uses of the same image, consider this one. Imagine you were to license the best photo you've ever taken for the high-profile international campaign we mentioned earlier. Say it was a long campaign, advertising in multiple media formats, plus extensive branding and use on collateral materials. Well, a lot of photographers would be tempted to charge for the main use only and throw all the other uses in as a bonus, but they're missing the point. When this client is finished with it, the future customer pool for that photo is reduced to one. It's highly unlikely that you'll ever make a high-end sale of that image ever again. And when you understand that and explain it to the client, the high-end buyers will usually get it, and you'll be amazed how many will actually have the budget for it. In fact, one of our very first sales ever was a similar situation. The buyer was a credit card company wanting to use the image on a credit card for up to 10 years, plus all the brochures to go with it, plus point of sale posters and collateral mailing materials and so on. In this one, the buyer actually made an offer up front, mid four figures, which was a bit more than the credit card use was worth on its own, but less than the total sale was really worth. but it still would have been a very useful pickup for the photographer. It would have actually been that photographer's second sale, the first big one, and there's no question he would have been more than happy with it as offered. Fortunately though, he sought some help from some of our more experienced photographers before deciding, and after some email back and forth and a few midnight phone calls, he factored in all the other uses as well and came up with a counter offer. He suggested a licence fee that was about double what the client had offered, and he reduced the usage to 5 years, with an option to renew if need be. And the thing is, the buyer never hesitated. There's an interesting footnote to that story though. The same buyer had also requested a second photo from another of our photographers and made them the same offer. That guy just accepted the deal as offered, and he was very happy with it, at least until he heard about the counter offer the other photographer made. Now that guy left some serious money on the table. The reason I tell you this though is simple. A lot of new photographers worry a lot about this kind of thing, but it would be almost impossible for you to do anything like that these days. You have better tools available, better support services, and now that you've heard this story, you'll know to always ask for a second opinion before you accept any offer that sounds really good. Going back to the high exposure usage for a minute, some photographers will try to argue that there's still always a chance of other low-end sales afterwards for that same image. But what you need to remember is that the low end is also the highly competitive end. So there might be uses the image is suitable for, but the competition for those sales is going to be extremely high. So once your image is used high profile, that's pretty much it. So unless the original client decides to relicense the image, its residual value is virtually gone. So your initial license fee should be very close to the residual value of that image at the time. A lot of images will have a limited life expectancy. People images are probably the best example of this. There's big demand for good lifestyle images, that's people doing pretty much anything, and yet anything that shows current fashions is immediately running on borrowed time. Clothes, hairstyles, home decor, city skylines, they're all the kinds of elements that date an image very fast and can see great photography lose all value before its time. If you have a good photo that features any of these, you really have to accept that its days probably are numbered. So the fee you negotiate should be comparable to what might have made licensing the image multiple times non-exclusive in that same time frame. In most situations that won't be a major issue, but it's something to keep in mind when you know you have a high potential stock image. Okay, so how do we determine these prices? If you've ever used a rights managed pricing calculator, you would have seen a lot of different criteria for each specific usage, and it can look a bit confusing at first. It's really quite simple really. Basically these are all factors of exposure. How prominently the image will be displayed, how long for, and how many people are likely to see it. And we know those are the factors that decide what sort of impact the use will have on the image's residual value. And your price is simply the product of those elements applied to the residual value of the image. The key is not to get caught up in too much detail. When you use the various calculators and print guides, they are assuming that it is a good strong image with average lifetime sales potential. If your image is quite common or not particularly special, you might consider discounting the calculator price by 10 to 20%. If the image is one of your best with real potential, you might consider adding a premium to it. If the image is one of a kind, unique and perfect execution and likely to be in high demand, then adding 100% loading might be in order. The main thing to remember is the average is referring to the sales potential, not the image itself. So be careful not to get too greedy, thinking your images are better than average. It's not about the average quality of work, it's about the average sales potential. Beyond that, be as accurate as you can when selecting criteria, but don't panic if you don't know a specific detail or the options offered don't exactly match the usage you require. In most cases, it won't have a major impact on the final price. Just pick the closest match you can find, and if you're not sure, try a few different combinations until you get a feel for the appropriate price range. If you're new to stock, I would always recommend you spend some time getting familiar with a broad range of price and usage combinations. And for that, I do have to recommend the Stock Photo Price Calculator. There's just no other substitute for being able to punch in dozens of different usage combinations and seeing instantly the effect each criteria has on the recommended price. You can see what sends a price up, what brings it down, and what has little overall impact. It's the best way I know to get a real feel for pricing your work and to get a good understanding of what your photography is actually worth. Be warned though, a lot of new photographers will get a real shock the first time they use the calculator and they start to realise just how far below market value they've been pricing their work. We've even had abusive emails in the past from people because the prices were so far below what they'd been charging, they were sure we were running some sort of scam. The fact is though, prices from our calculator are constantly adjusting based on real-time feedback from our 5,000 plus registered users. So if you want a comprehensive guide to current market prices, this is as good as it gets. Well, almost as good as it gets. You see, the calculator website is just the public version of the calculator we have built into Global Eye Stock Library. So as a contributing photographer, you have the option to simply enable the calculator and let your clients work out their own prices, and then you just get the orders when they accept. Alternatively, you can disable the calculator and the buyers are still prompted for the same details, but they're told that you'll supply a quote shortly. That way you get all the info plus the calculated price, so you can send them a quote at whatever price point you like. Most of our photographers do prefer that option as it gives them the chance to negotiate and upsell. The automated option is quite popular with new photographers while they find their feet. Either way, that's built in and there if you need it. Right now we've got a free trial on offer, so you could actually make a start with Global Eye and then just spend half an hour or so on the calculator getting totally up to speed on pricing. Here, check this out. Okay, this is just a super quick look at this. A little preview of the members area. Under here we've got tools and utilities. So I'll launch calculator. You'll see there's 6 different categories here. I think all up it covers about 46,000 different pricing combinations. And these prices aren't random, they're actually adjusted constantly based on the feedback of all the photographers using it. The actual calculator website has over 5,000 members by now, and it's been going since 2008, so there's an awful lot of data gone into there, and it's basically prices adjusting up and down based on the photographer feedback on their understanding of current market prices. So basically you select one of these categories, so we'll try an advertising one just to give you a look, and we'll just select, well, brochure's a pretty common one, we'll say for a year, at a half page. These are just some fairly standard settings, and you'll see the price comes up here. If we scroll down a bit, you'll see we've got this rate this price. For that one I think that's probably a bit high, so I'll just rate it as such. You'll see we're back at the start. You can go through, you can do this for any number of combinations. Textbooks is probably one of the cheaper uses we'll see, and they're normally for a couple of years, quite small reproductions and relatively small print runs. And you'll see for a fairly long use that is significantly lower than a advertising use, but that's about right. So that's the calculator. And as mentioned, you can jump in, you can grab the free trial of Global Eye if you like, and you can actually come in and use that. If you want to check out the stock photo calculator site, you'll find it's very similar. It is the same data and a very similar interface, but that is a paid service. It's quite cheap. It's just a small fee to offset our costs. But if you're planning on coming on board with Global Eye, I'd just suggest you grab the trial and come inside and use it for free. Okay, that's photography pricing in a nutshell. This has gone on a little bit longer than I'd planned, but I hope you're feeling a little more confident about pricing your photography now. I also hope you'll take a moment to check out the rest of the Global Eye package below. It really is quite different to what you'll find on offer at the mainstream libraries. If their low prices, open-ended licensing and high commissions leave you a bit cold, then you really need to check out the brief presentation on the next page. The simple facts are the demand for photography has never been higher. There are plenty of buyers who'll still pay fair and reasonable prices for quality images, and you don't have to settle for a bad deal just to stay in the game. So whether you're already selling your work, or you're eager to make a start selling your photography, or even if you're just doing some preliminary research into your options, I do urge you to click on the link below and check out Global Eye before you go too much further. At the very least, you'll get some valuable information on how stock really works these days and what your stock library is supposed to be doing for you. Okay, thanks again for your interest, and we'll see you next time.